Good evening, everyone. It's so great to have you here. Congratulations on a fabulous, fabulous episode.
Thank you. It's so good to see you all.
Wonderful. We are having folks migrate over from the premiere and happy to see comments showing up in the chat. Feel free to add your questions or comments. You know, there were so many different composers and wonderful women musicians who were mentioned in the course of this episode, and we're super happy to explore their stories further than we could in the little segments intervening between the music. So it's wonderful to hear from people. You know, when we were getting ready to come on this live Q&A, you made an interesting observation, Byron, about how Madalena Laura Sirmen, in the fact that she, went on tour and sent money back to her family in Ravenna, had something in common, in fact, with Clara Schumann.
Yeah, Clara Schumann actually had 7 children, and her husband had pretty severe mental illness, eventually committed himself to an insane asylum, and she supported the whole family. And so she would go off on concert tours and send back money, just as Madalena Sirmen had done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a question here for Michelle. That we understand that you started out your musical education in the San Francisco Girls Chorus, and wondered if you could tell us more what that experience was like for you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Girls Chorus was really my first musical family, and I was a super introverted kid. I started on the piano at age 3. I was so short that my feet didn't even touch the ground. And when I first joined the girls' chorus at age 8, I was like too shy to even look up at the conductor. And I feel like, especially for really shy or, kind of pensive young women, that the girls' chorus just has a phenomenal structure and discipline. You're rehearsing 2 to 3 days a week from the get-go and pretty much all season long. And we got to perform, in outdoor venues from Stern Grove, out by the ocean, to all kinds of concert venues and wonderful church venues in the Bay, and to do children's roles with San Francisco Opera, especially if we were convincingly short, like I was.
At a certain point, yeah.
Right, as long as you stayed below a certain height. Yeah. And I loved the range of repertoire that we learned, sacred and secular, new music, traditional. And interestingly, like we were talking about a little bit before the show, we did sing some music from the Venetian Ospedali. Vivaldi was my introduction to that repertoire, but it's been really fun to explore it more in this program.
Right, absolutely. And I had found myself sort of wondering, in a way, with the Ospedali being this kind of, educational, like residential, situation for young girls where music was a really important part of the education, and like you're talking about sort of institutional structure and discipline, is that a 20th century, as close as we could come to sort of having or simulating an experience like that, and how formative that must be in a way.
Absolutely. I think it actually got in my muscle memory from all of those years. Like between 4 and 6 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I was just like ready to go to rehearsal because that's what I did. But I think it was invaluable, the music theory, the ear training, the range of repertoire and conversations with composers. And just, I think being immersed in treble music amidst empowered women of all ages, I think I didn't realize growing up how significant that was for me, and I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We have a question here for Shelby. We'd love to learn more about Lombardini Sirmen. And I mentioned just in passing your CD project, so I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So the CD is her entire Opus 5 collection, which are all duos for just 2 violins. It came up because we don't have those on any publicity announcements for concerts, but they did so many private, performances that could have been performed with her husband. So I kind of think of that, or with some other students at the Ospedale. She wrote all her music kind of young and then published it later. But they're great. They're 2 movement works. They kind of all follow the same form, and they're just really full of character and you can kind of get the sense that it's a conversation between the 2 people. They're meant to be enjoyed, and it'll be released later this year on the Orpheus Classical label. So no exact date yet, but stay tuned. Yeah.
No, CD projects always run on their own schedules, whatever schedule you might think to have for them. I was personally found it very tantalizing when you mentioned the partners of Maddalena and also of Ludovico, her husband. Because obviously she's off on tour and he's at home. And what do we know about how they led their lives independently?
Well, the reason why it comes up initially is because when she starts touring, she has kind of a chaperone. There's a specific word for this title in Italian, which is, it's kind of a man that goes with the woman just to kind of be their, I guess, protector. It's just chaperone, and they get to pick who it is. And so she went with this Reverend Terzi, starting when she was in her 20s, and he stayed with her until her death, and he was in her will. She gave him way more money than she gave her husband in the first will, and then they were written about in the kind of gossip columns, but he really was, his presence was there throughout her entire rest of her career. And her husband, Ludovico, ended up, we don't exactly know the dates, but for a really long time, with this woman, Countess Zarletti. And there's this whole dramatic letter that we have where Maddalena and Ludovico's daughter was living with her, and Maddalena went and removed her and sent her to school. It's like this, it's a drama in my head, the way that they lived their lives.
Someone needs to make a movie.
I think so. Yeah, there's like a period of 13 years that they weren't in the same city. So who knows what was going on.
Interesting. A question here for any and all wanting to hear about any or all upcoming projects. I get this.
Well, I'll say a short-term one and a long-term one.
Sure, please.
Because coming up this Sunday, the 21st, at 7 p.m. Pacific time, so 10 p.m. Eastern, we're premiering the next Byron Scheckman and Friends concert, which includes a sonata by Isabella Leonarda, played by Ingrid Matthews. That's a short-term thing, and this is hasn't been announced yet, but I guess I'm saying it anyway. Michelle and I have a plan for spring of 2022, by which time hopefully we'll be able to be in a room together for a program of all Baroque music by women, with pieces by some of the composers you heard in this program.
Yes, excited about that. And just the vision of it makes me happy, picturing us all in the same space. We'll never take it for granted. I love this question. This is such a generous question. I have a couple of different live stream concerts coming up. One is on the 1st of May with the Alexander String Quartet and the Gold Coast Chamber Ensemble out here in the Bay. It's a pretty cool program. It's chamber ensemble works by Dvorak juxtaposed with settings of American spirituals, arranged by Harry Burley, with a little bit of a spotlight on their relationship and their friendship. It also features a Native American flautist and some beautiful Native American music, and kind of the intersection of all of those forms in the formation of American music traditions. So I'm excited for that. And also the Kaleidoscope Vocal Ensemble has a home themed concert streaming, I believe it's April the 3rd. And each of us will feature music that has been beloved in our families that we make at home, and just talk a little bit about our musical upbringing and also what Kaleidoscope means to us. So those are 2 upcoming concerts that I'm excited about.
That's wonderful. And are you each performing as individuals in that and talking
Yes.
as individuals? Wonderful.
We are. So those will be kind of informal solo performances.
Beautiful. Fabulous. And Shelby, before we move on, what's coming up for you?
Well, I've mentioned to you, I'm working on this project with Valentini sonatas.
Yeah.
These little, they're trio sonatas and some of the parts are missing. So I'm working on kind of filling those in and seeing what they might sound like and recording them. And that's kind of a longer term thing, but that's what it's fun for me right now.
Fantastic.
So you're a composer now.
I guess so.
So versatile, Shelby.
A question here from Elizabeth Winefield, who was a guest on our last episode. It's great to see Elizabeth here.
Hey,
How does
Elizabeth.
the knowledge of the lives of these women led, both their successes and their difficulties, contribute to how you work through and perform their music?
What a phenomenal question. I love it. I'll use Francesca Caccini as an example. I think knowing about her work in the Medici court and how, sort of influential a post she had there, I think about her compositions on a number of levels. I think about, there were actually political aims for the Ruggiero opera. And they were sort of embedded in the aims of the court and part of the role that she was fulfilling in her work there. She also had some personal aims. I believe that the betrothal of her daughter was part of the motivation behind the plot. And I also just think of her as such a multifaceted, talented woman and virtuoso herself. So I think of the personal resonance as well as the wider political and kind of socio-political context of her work. And I just find, especially the aria that we excerpted for this salon, to be such an intimate portrait. And, the siren has a lot of dimensions herself, but I think that aria reflects a lot of elements of mastery of Francesca Caccini's, both in her personal life and in her wider professional life. And it's just kind of fun to embrace all those different facets in learning her music. And I thought of one other example. Actually, I've been working on a recital of the art songs of Florence Price this month that will air on the 19th.
Yeah.
So this Friday. And knowing about the wider context of Florence Price's life has really profoundly informed my relationship with her songs. And it's also sort of macro to micro, the macro being the wider resonance of the Great Migration and Florence Price's personal migration from Little Rock to Chicago and other points north. But also, I think more personally, there's always this really nuanced relationship to adversity and resilience, I think, in the texts that Price chooses to set. And also, it seems to me a really deliberate choice to celebrate joy and fantasy and imagination at the same time, sort of a reclamation of levity and a belief that life has bright spots, even amidst difficulty. And I think in the way that we're all living right now, that resonates pretty deeply.
That sounds really inspiring. Thank you.
What comes to my mind is one particular quote in one of Clara Schumann's diaries, which is actually from after she had published 23 volumes of music, including piano music and songs and a piano trio and 3 romances for violin and piano. There's an entry in her diary in which she says, "I don't know why I would delude myself to thinking I could be a composer. No woman ever has, and for me to think I could be the first would be arrogant."
Wow.
And that sentence right there, I think, if anyone needed any convincing of why representation matters, I think that sentence right there kind of sums it up. why we need to be playing all of this music and singing all this music, and 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 encouraging people in our own time, and not only encouraging but financing people in our own time to create new music, people who are not white men.
Right.
That whole concept. Oh,
sorry, I was just going to
Go ahead.
mention that there's resonances in what you were talking about there with that quote from Clara Schumann, Byron, in the dedication that Shelby had read, addressing herself, with I think a type of modesty which is completely uncharacteristic of, dedication pages from male composers to the Princess Wilhelmina, for instance.
I love the evolution of the dedications in Barbara Strozzi's. I think it's 8 volumes of music, and she starts out very very groveling, like me, a mere woman doing this thing. And she gets more and more confident over the course. If you look at the dedication.
Well, Byron, what I was just going to say is the concept that Clara Schumann thought she couldn't do it because it would be arrogant. That's also like a very oppressive feel. Like if she thinks she had something to offer, it's not arrogant to do it. And I think that concept too is really proof of the whole environment. It's just, and now we know that she's not at all the first woman composer. It's just so important. Yeah. One thing that I would like to add about playing Madalena's music, going back to Elizabeth's question, is this concept of like when we're performing in a historical context or trying to recreate a little bit of what the music was like, there are so many different people who would have been playing the music. And when we get into performer composers like the women we're talking about, of course they were playing their music, but Madalena's music made it all the way through all these different places. And so there were so many different types of people, nationalities. It made it to the United States. People were performing it in Sweden. So there's this whole rich kind of take on how you can approach that music. And there's not just one right way. And I think that's also really incredible about all these composers who are published very widely, because it was played a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A question here from Michelle. It seems like performing works by women is important to you, and how have you centered female voices in your career?
Oh, thank you. I think from my early days in the girls' chorus that we had the chance to work with living female composers like Chen Yi, I remember working with from a fairly young age, and having her come to rehearsals and hearing her talk about texts. And I don't think that I understood what a gift that was, at age 9, to just sort of have that be normal. I would say also that in my career, I've sought kind of a little more of an even balance in the past, especially 5 or 10 years, between period repertoire and contemporary repertoire. I think for a lot of different reasons, but I just love living composers. I love hearing the perspective of living composers, and also poets and librettists, and the chance for that dialogue in real time, and also the chance to work on a project together in a dynamic way. So a couple of examples, but I'm part of a female trio called Trio Eos, after the goddess of the dawn. And we sing a lot of medieval and Renaissance music, as well as contemporary music, for actually pretty much the same reason, to celebrate the whole range of colors that the female voice is capable of, from very contained and sort of pure tone to the most virtuosic, and also to kind of facilitate dialogue across the eras, which has sort of become, I think, like a centerpiece of my mission as an artist. And one other example is I worked with The Crossing, Philadelphia-based new music ensemble led by Donald Nally that is always just doing trailblazing awesome things. And we premiered Julia Wolf's Fire in My Mouth with the New York Philharmonic in January 2019. And that is like the greatest feministic tour de force experience of my career, because it was written for 36 women. It's a kind of a reenactment of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 and a reclamation of the women's rights in the workplace movement. But more broadly, it's just a celebration of feminist expression, from immigration, the opening movement that's about aspiration and hope for a new life, through the factory movement that paints the whole soundscape of the factory, through the protest movement, which is like permission to just rage against injustice and demand greater conditions, fair conditions for women. And then finally, the fire, which is like a commemoration, but also kind of like a vigil for those we've lost in the fight. So to me, it's kind of a great microcosm of what the feminist movement has always been about, and how, as we've talked about over the course of this episode, it has so many nuances. And like, what does it mean to center women's voices in programming? Well, to understand us in a nuanced way, right? And to celebrate us in all of our colors. So I think that's become really a centerpiece of my work and the work I want to continue to do.
Wonderful. A question here from Carla, who I think is in the Denver area. Do you feel that any of these women felt the need to prove themselves? Do you know of any stories that portray that aspect, or any other challenges they faced as women in the music world? I personally think about double standards and criticism, not just gendered language, but also like literally double standards. I did a project early in my doctorate, actually based on a musical couple, and Shelby knows a little bit about them. And this was the oboist, this is in the 1770s and 80s, oboist named Ludwig August Lebrun, and his wife is named Francesca Danzi, and she, I think, was the the sister of Franz Danzi, who was famous for writing woodwind quintets, and I think Innocence Danzi was an uncle or father who was a famous cellist in the Mannheim Orchestra. In any case, she had, utterly singular vocal talents, and it's one of those situations actually with both of them. I think they were very distinctive musicians in their own right, and there was a lot written about them, including, reviews in Paris from the Concert Spirituel and testimonials from Charles Burney. And not entirely unlike Sirmen in a way. Like later in their career, the criticism got a little more challenging. And the thing that was always really interesting for me was how Lebrun was talked about as having this incredible vocal quality to his oboe playing. And Francesca Danzi, she was extraordinary. She was the kind of singer who was singing high A's, no problem, a third above the Queen of the Night. And there are all these concertante arias written for the two of them. Arias that in a way like almost no one else could sing. This is really truly, music written for one person, and that kind of, embodies that person's talents. And, but ultimately, she got criticized for being too instrumental in her quality. So this this idea of having technical agility becomes pejorative, and that instrumental is masculine and that vocal is feminized, and all that sort of thing. It's kind of complicated in my opinion. So
fascinating. I also love hearing about Sirmen, who I've learned so much from in our conversations, and that kind of evolution over the course of her lifetime from this, in terms of the commentary that was published about her, moving from like a fairly superficial way of characterizing her to a more kind of valuation on the merits over the course of her career as she kind of came into self-possession. I think it's a pretty cool evolution, but it also says a lot about what she was up against.
And I'll add to that, the part that we didn't make it to discussing tonight in the episode is that after she had been quite famous for a number of years, her career took a huge downward turn after the tort style bow, which is kind of what we think of as the modern violin bow, was invented, and people started criticizing her playing and her style. She just didn't want to change, so she became a singer, and then she was in all these performances, and she was getting reviews that were not so complimentary. But it's just, I don't think, back to that question, I don't think that was something she overcame because she was a woman, but I think that attitude of like, I'm going to still do this, I'm going to keep performing, there's just so much evidence of that determination. And maybe it's like Clara Shimon, maybe it is arrogance that she thought she could do it, but she definitely did, and she pursued it kind of her entire life. So I just love that. I love reading the reviews and learning about her through that.
She persisted.
Exactly.
She persisted. Indeed. One last question here. Do you have any advice for music educators to include more diverse repertoire or music history into their teaching, especially working with young beginners?
I do have a thought about that I would like to share, which is that there's actually a lot of 18th century music by women, and some, I'm thinking of specifically of music by Ignatius Sancho, Sancho, a composer of African origin from England in the late 18th century. That's quite simple music, and actually a lot of, well, Ignatius Sancho's music is written such that it can be played as the pieces can be played as keyboard pieces or as pieces for a melody instrument with accompaniment. So whether you're teaching young violinists or flutists or pianists, that's repertoire. And his story is so interesting, which probably I shouldn't go into now because that's not the topic here, but look him up because it's an amazing story. Yeah. And for keyboard players, there are lots of pieces that are not difficult, by Jacques Laguerre, by Mariana Martinez, by Ana Bon, by Maria Manuel Bayón, lots of people.
Wonderful. Well, it's been so great to create this episode with you, and thanks so much for a really wonderful, robust, and heartfelt discussion tonight. And I invite our audience to join us again on March 29th for Medieval Visionaries, which has a pretty feminist bent to it itself. And talking about being inspired by the writings of Christine de Pizan in the early 15th century. And tune in on Thursday night. Lady Lisa has a new concert coming out with an absolutely wonderful soprano, Clara Batzolk, plenty of music by Elizabeth Jacques de Laguerre, and other female composers, including a few songs by Julie Pinel, which I do not think have been recorded previously. So that's exciting as well. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you to our audience. It's been great tonight.
Thank you.
What a great pleasure to do this with all of you.
It was such fun. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.